The studio lights gleamed with flawless precision across the sleek set of late-night spotlight. Cameras rolled. Applause signs blinked. And at the center of it all stood Fiona Carrington, queen of sharp-tongued wit, armed with sarcasm and strategy. She was late-night television's fearless voice, a staunch progressive icon, known for dismantling outdated norms and publicly eviscerating anything that smelled of tradition. Her fans didn't tune in for conversation. They came for confrontation. And tonight she was ready. Her target? Mark Wahlberg. A tough guy turned faith guy. Fiona had scoffed earlier during the morning production meeting. Let's see how long he holds up under actual scrutiny. Her producer handed her a dossier. He's been pretty vocal lately, Catholic faith, morning mass, even said he tries to fast once a week. Not exactly mainstream Hollywood behavior. Fiona rolled her eyes. Perfect. A pious action hero. Let's see what happens when he steps into the real ring. Meanwhile, just blocks away, Mark Wahlberg sat in quiet reflection in his dressing room. No entourage. No ego. Just him, a small wooden rosary wrapped around his fingers and a bottle of water. The distant hum of the city faded behind the rhythm of his breathing. His assistant, Greg, peeked in. 5 minutes out. Mark nodded. I'm good. You know she's gonna come at you hard, right? I know. Greg hesitated. You ready? Mark stood up slowly. You don't prepare for a fight with someone like Fiona. You just stay grounded. Let truth speak. Back at the studio, Fiona rehearsed her opening monologue. Precision jabs about Wahlberg's past, his faith, his supposed image shift. The guy who once dropped F-bombs in rap tracks now drops scripture in interviews. What a rebrand. The audience roared in anticipation. This was Fiona's turf. And she wasn't about to give ground. But Mark Wahlberg wasn't coming to fight. He was coming to stand. And in just a few minutes, he would step onto the stage not to argue, not to defend, but to quietly challenge everything the audience thought they knew about strength, faith, and identity. No one, not even Fiona, was prepared for what was coming. Not the stillness. Not the silence. Not the truth. The applause swelled as Mark Wahlberg stepped onto the stage. The crowd's energy was a mix, some cheers, some polite curiosity, and a noticeable undercurrent of doubt. Mark walked calmly, his expression neither defensive nor smug, just steady. He shook Fiona's hand and offered a slight nod to the audience. Welcome to the show, Mark, Fiona said with a grin. Or should I say, Father Mark? Laughter rippled through the crowd. Mark smiled politely. I'll stick with Mark, if that's all right. Fiona crossed her legs and leaned back, confident. So let's get into it. You've been making headlines for your faith transformation. Mass at 4:30 a.m.? Prayer over protein shakes? Isn't this a little theatrical? Mark chuckled lightly. It's just my routine. I need to stay grounded in something deeper than work, money, or fame. Faith gives me that. But come on, Fiona said, waving her hand. You're a movie star. You live in a world of illusions. Don't you think believing in ancient doctrine is just another illusion, one dressed up as truth? Mark turned to her calmly. Faith is an illusion. It's the lens I use to see reality more clearly. Without it, everything else starts to blur. The audience quieted. Fiona didn't miss a beat. All right, let's test that lens. You've seen how religion's been used. Wars, oppression, judgment. Are you telling me that doesn't bother you? It does, Mark said plainly. It should bother everyone. But the abuse of something sacred doesn't make it false. It makes it misused. Fiona's smile tightened. But you admit it's been dangerous? I admit people have done dangerous things in the name of God, Mark replied. But people have also done dangerous things in the name of progress. That doesn't mean we abandon progress. We don't throw out truth because some misuse it. There was a murmur in the studio. A woman in the second row lowered her phone. She was listening now. So you're saying Christianity is truth? Fiona challenged. Mark answered, softly but firmly, it is to me. And the beautiful thing about truth is, it doesn't panic when it's challenged. The audience froze. Fiona blinked. She hadn't planned for that line. Fiona uncrossed her legs, her tone shifting subtly. So truth doesn't panic. That's poetic. But let's get practical, Mark. The world's not exactly peaceful. Do you really think prayer solves anything when there's injustice everywhere? Mark looked at her, eyes steady. Prayer doesn't erase injustice. But it prepares you to face it without becoming it. The crowd murmured again, softer this time. Fiona narrowed her gaze. And you don't think that's just passive? Like hiding behind silence instead of acting? Silence isn't hiding, he replied. Sometimes silence is the space where courage gets built. Fiona blinked. You sound like a monk. Mark smiled. I'm just someone who's learned that yelling doesn't equal strength. She leaned in now. Okay, but what about Hollywood? This is an industry that thrives on image, control, dominance. Doesn't faith make you look weak? Mark shrugged. Maybe. But I'd rather be seen as weak and be whole than look powerful and be hollow. Several audience members looked at one another. Fiona tapped her pen against her palm. You know this isn't what people expected tonight, she said. They thought we'd go toe-to-toe. Mark nodded. I'm not here to fight. I'm here to be honest. But doesn't that get lonely? Fiona asked. Doesn't standing in faith isolate you from normal life? Sometimes, he admitted. But peace is a high price to pay just to fit in. That answer landed. Fiona leaned back slowly. So you'd rather stand alone in truth than with a crowd in comfort? Yes, Mark said. Because comfort fades. Truth stays. The audience was still again. The mood was changing, not just in the room, but in Fiona's eyes. She tilted her head, her voice lower. Do you ever get angry? At the world? At God? Mark nodded. Of course. But faith doesn't erase anger. It teaches me where to aim it. Fiona raised an eyebrow. And where do you aim it? At injustice, he said. Not people. Not critics. Not even God. Silence again. Fiona looked at her notes, then set them aside without reading the next question. Fiona took a slow breath and sat straighter. Her show was known for fire, for control. But somehow Mark Wahlberg had brought something else entirely, something quieter, weightier. And she felt it. You've made a lot of movies, she said, shifting tone. You've played soldiers, cops, con men, heroes. Has your faith ever clashed with your work? Sometimes, Mark said without hesitation. But when that happens, I ask myself, would I be proud of this if my kids saw it? Would I be proud if God saw it? Because he does. Fiona raised an eyebrow. That's a high standard. It should be, he said. The moment I stop caring about what's good and only care about what's popular, I'm not acting anymore. I'm pretending. A few heads nodded in the crowd. Fiona leaned in again. But you live in a world that mocks faith, that sees religion as outdated or even dangerous. Doesn't that ever make you want to stay quiet? I don't need to be loud to be faithful, Mark replied. I just need to be consistent. Fiona tilted her head. But critics say you're using your faith as part of your brand, some kind of image reset. What do you say to that? Mark smiled gently. I've done enough movies and made enough money. I don't need a brand. I need peace. And I've found it. There was a pause. No offense, Fiona said, but peace doesn't sell. Mark nodded. Maybe not, but it heals. And the world doesn't need more noise. It needs healing. A ripple moved through the studio again. The audience wasn't shifting in their seats anymore. They were holding still. Fiona blinked slowly. So you're not trying to convince anyone? No, he said. I'm just trying to live what I believe. Her voice dropped. But what if what you believe turns out to be wrong? Mark looked her directly in the eyes. Then I'd rather live fully in that belief than halfway in doubt. Because I've lived that way, chasing everything and catching nothing. Faith brought me back to myself. A long silence followed. Fiona exhaled. That's surprisingly honest. I'm not here to win, Mark said. I'm here to tell the truth. Fiona looked out at the audience. They weren't checking their phones. They weren't laughing or whispering. They were listening. Really listening. Something rare on live television. She turned back to Mark. You've mentioned truth a lot tonight. But what does that mean to you? Like specifically? Mark took a moment, then answered slowly. It means remembering who I am when no one's watching. It means treating people with dignity, even when they don't return it. It means praying even when I don't feel like it. Truth isn't a moment. It's a direction. Fiona was quiet. You really believe this, don't you? She said, almost surprised. Mark nodded. Especially now. The more noise I see in the world, the more I cling to what's steady. She smirked slightly. You think the world is noisy? He chuckled. The world is screaming. But peace doesn't scream. It waits. The crowd was still again. Someone near the back cleared their throat softly. Fiona tapped her pen on her knee. So if someone watching right now feels lost, like their life's unraveling, what would you say to them? Mark didn't hesitate. I'd say, you're not your worst day. You're not your mistakes. And if you think no one sees you, God does. A young man in the third row dropped his gaze to the floor. He looked like he was blinking something back. And what if someone feels like giving up? Fiona asked. Mark's voice lowered. Then I'd tell them what I've told myself. Hold on. Just hold on one more day. Sometimes the miracle isn't in the change. It's in the endurance. Fiona stared at him, something in her expression softening. And all of this calm, this peace, it really comes from faith? Yes, Mark said. Because everything else fades. Fame fades. Fortune fades. But God doesn't. Fiona let the silence sit. Then she leaned in closer and asked, "Do you pray?" Mark nodded. "Every day." "For what?" He smiled. "Not for success. Not even for strength. I pray for wisdom. And for humility." Fiona looked down briefly, then met his eyes again. "Humility," she repeated. "Yes," he said. "Because strength without humility destroys. But humility builds." For a moment, Fiona said nothing. Her usual rhythm, her sharp timing, had been slowly replaced with something more reflective. She was no longer hosting a segment. She was having a conversation she hadn't planned for. She folded her hands and spoke with less edge. "I've made a career out of questioning everything. Tearing down facades, pointing out the cracks. But tonight, I feel like I'm the one being questioned." Mark didn't gloat. He simply nodded. Sometimes the hardest questions are the ones we ask ourselves. There was no applause. No dramatic cue. Just stillness. Fiona glanced at her producer off camera, then back at Mark. "Let me ask you this. Have you ever felt completely alone in your faith?" "Yes," Mark said without flinching. "Many times. Even surrounded by people. Faith doesn't always make you feel strong. Sometimes it just keeps you from falling apart." Fiona tilted her head. "So why keep going?" "Because I'd rather be alone in truth than surrounded by people in denial." The line hit harder than expected. Someone in the audience let out a breath. Another wiped at their eye. "You really believe this isn't just a phase?" Fiona asked, her tone almost skeptical again. Mark leaned back calm. "It's not a phase. It's the most real thing I've ever held on to." Fiona opened her mouth, then paused. "What about people who've been hurt by religion? By faith leaders, by institutions?" "I say this," Mark replied gently. "Don't confuse God with the people who misrepresent him. If they hurt you, I'm sorry. But please, don't let broken people make you miss a faithful God." Fiona blinked. She wasn't expecting that either. "And what about the doubters?" she asked. The skeptics watching this thinking, "This is just Hollywood talk." Mark turned toward the camera. "Then don't believe me. Ask for yourself. Truth doesn't hide. But it also doesn't shout. You'll have to listen for it." There was a hush across the studio. No one moved. This wasn't the interview Fiona had planned. It was something deeper. Fiona leaned back slightly in her chair. Her usual confidence, while still present, now carried a different weight. Less performance. More presence. She looked at Mark. "You've seen the world, Mark. The best of it. The worst of it. Fame, power, failure. You've had second chances most people only dream of. Has your faith ever broken under pressure?" Mark nodded slowly. "Absolutely. Faith doesn't make you immune to struggle. It just gives you a place to stand when the ground moves." Fiona considered that. "So it's not about being perfect?" "No," he said. "It's about being real. About admitting when you're broken, and still choosing to get up." She stared at him. "Have you ever felt like walking away from all of it? The belief, the discipline, the stillness?" "Yes," he said. "There were times when I felt like I didn't deserve grace. Like my past was louder than my prayers. And what changed? I realized grace isn't earned," he said. "It's given. Freely. But we have to choose whether we'll accept it or not." Fiona's voice dropped. "You make it sound so simple." "It's not simple," Mark said. "It's just true." The audience remained still, as if even breathing too loud would interrupt something sacred. Fiona looked around the studio. "This isn't what I expected," she admitted. Mark offered a kind smile. "Truth rarely is." She nodded slowly. "Okay, one more. If someone watching right now is on the edge, full of doubt, pain, maybe even anger, what would you say?" Mark turned toward the camera again. His voice was low, sincere. "I'd say I see you. Maybe not with my eyes, but with my heart. I've been there. You're not weak for feeling pain. And you're not alone." The words hung in the air like incense. Not loud. Not flashy. Just real. "Hope," he added, "doesn't shout. It whispers. But it never leaves." No applause came. No dramatic music swelled. Just that rare, sacred quiet. The kind that says something true has been spoken, and it's still echoing. Fiona looked down at her notes. Then she quietly slid them aside. The folder of scripted questions now sat untouched beside Fiona. The studio, once a place of punchlines and applause signs, had transformed into something quieter. Something truer. Fiona looked across at Mark, her voice softer than it had been all night. I invited you here thinking I'd challenge your beliefs. But instead, I think I've been challenged. Mark didn't gloat. He simply nodded once, respectfully. She hesitated, then asked, "Do you ever feel like you're wasting your breath? That talking about faith in a world this loud won't matter?" "I used to," Mark replied. "But then I realized something. Truth doesn't need volume. It needs consistency." Fiona was silent, then asked, "You really believe people can change?" Mark leaned forward slightly. "I've lived it, and I've seen it. I've seen men come out of prison and become fathers. I've seen addicts find healing. I've seen broken families rebuild. Yes, I believe people can change, but not without grace." The audience was still again. A few had tears in their eyes. One man silently clasped his hands together in his lap. Fiona whispered, "And you think faith is the key?" "I know it is," Mark answered, "because I've tried everything else." There was nothing performative in his voice. Just clarity. Fiona exhaled. "I don't know what I expected tonight, but it wasn't this." Mark smiled. "Neither did I. But maybe that's the point." They sat in silence for a few seconds more. Then Fiona turned toward the camera and said, "Tonight, I didn't get a fight. I got something else. And maybe that's exactly what we needed." The audience rose slowly. No whoops. No cheers. Just a quiet, reverent standing ovation. As the credits began to roll, Fiona extended her hand again. This time, not as a host, but as someone humbled. Mark shook it gently. "Thank you for listening." She nodded. "Thank you for speaking." The camera zoomed out slowly, the shot framing not a clash of views, but a meeting of hearts. The next day, social media buzzed. Not with outrage, but with quotes, screenshots, threads of people saying they watched and they cried. That something hit them. Something different. And one line, above all, echoed across millions of screens. "Truth doesn't panic.